All right, so episode one of the Rack and the Rat podcast with Nukes and Wheezy. This has been in the works for quite some time. More talking about it than anything else for the last, I don't know, easily a year.
Years.
Yeah, for sure. So we're not gonna go around and introduce ourselves or any of that stuff, but we'll dive right into it. Yeah, today we want to talk about Resident Evil 1 remake and if it should be remade, which is a very hot topic
Mhm.
amongst the Resident Evil community. In researching this, quote unquote, browsing Reddit, um,
Yeah.
a lot of hot discussions with regards how people feel about it. It seems to be two categories from what I can see is the uh the boomers are pretty happy with remake.
With the original remake?
Yeah, with that being left alone. Whereas the Zoomers aren't so particularly happy with regards fixed camera angles and tank controls, but we'll get onto that like a little bit later. So
Mhm.
yeah, I guess by the time we get to the end of this conversation, we'll know what camp we're both in. But I have a sneaking suspicion I know which one it is already. So yeah, first off, graphics wise, um, I personally think remake stands the test of time. Um, and
Mhm.
I'm talking about the facelift as well that I got in 2015 with the remaster, right? Of course,
Yeah.
the original GameCube version that came out in 2002, it looks a little bit gritty. It looks like it would need a touch up, and it did get it. It did get it. But so when we go and we play the game today, in my opinion, that atmosphere, that looming fear, that underlying
Mhm.
dread still exists within the game today. Now, I guess the drab color scheme that comes along with the Spencer Mansion, um, it doesn't really need a touch up as such. In my opinion,
Yeah.
that fear, that dread, everything is still captured really, really well. And against those
Mhm.
pre-render backgrounds, I think it looks absolutely fantastic. Like, what would your thoughts be regards like how it graphically looks today?
Well, it's held up very well for a game that's, what, 22 years old?
Mm,
Even the GameCube version, as you said. Um, and it's a good contrast to the original, which is, the mansion is wacky kind of colored, and that's actually what kind of clues you in the original Resident Evil, that something's odd about this house, that this doesn't look like a normal house. And but they fixed that and make it sort of the classic haunted mansion, and they really pull in the dread and, as you said, and the mystery. And I'm not sure that they should touch it as much. Like in the Resident Evil 2 remake, they completely overhauled the atmosphere of the police station, and I don't think that would need to be done if they did remake the game. They could just, sort of change the perspective, maybe deepen it a little bit.
hmm For sure, yeah, and it's
Hmm.
it's interesting point that you brought up with regards how the Spencer Mansion looks in the like OG game from 1996. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Hmm. That's correct.
The
That's correct.
the house. It's what's interesting about it, and I can't remember. Somebody pointed this out before, be it in a Twitch stream that I was watching, or maybe I was streaming myself. I can't remember, but somebody said that the house in the original looks infected itself because it's so wacky and it's
Ah,
so
yeah.
out there.
I never thought of that.
Yeah, which I always found to be like a really interesting kind of take on it. But the move
Mhm.
towards this drab, um, dead looking home or
Mhm.
mansion, I think was definitely the right move to make. And even today, like you said, I completely agree that it doesn't need to be altered. It doesn't need to be changed. Yes,
Mm.
certainly they could make some enhancements and they could deepen what they've already done a little bit, but do they want to do that? Do they want to actually alter the Spencer Mansion that people know and have loved for the last 20 years or so? I don't think
Mhm.
there's a lot of work required there if they uh, remake the game. Now, one area in which I can see a lot of big facelift occur on would be the cave section of the game. Very
Oh
similar,
yeah.
like you'd mentioned with Ori 2 remake, they completely overhauled the sewers, which was a great decision. Now, I'm coming from the perspective of someone that I actually played Ori 2 remake before I actually played the original Ori 2, which is sacrilege. I know. Feel free
Hmm.
to demolish me in the comments or whatever it may be. So it was very very interesting news. I think we were actually on a voice call and I was streaming it to you in Discord um when I played my Ori 2 OG for the first time, and I kept talking about how much I was absolutely dreading the sewers based on what my
Hmm.
preconceived notion was from the remake. Um so I think if they were to go and remake the game, to add a bit more atmosphere to the caves, make it a little bit more intricate, to kind of like deepen
Hmm.
it, if you will, to use the term that you used earlier on as well. Now, how they would go about and do that, I don't know. That's way above my pay grade, and maybe you might have some ideas on that. But I definitely feel as if that's one area when I go back and I revisit remake, it's definitely one area that feels a bit lacking. And I always kind of not dread the caves in the same way that I dread the sewers with RE2 remake, but I always feel like, oh,
Hmm.
this is a part now that I have to go and do. And I'm kind of like, meh
Yeah.
about it. I don't get that sense of excitement about the fear that I dive into in the Spencer Mansion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Like it's the part that I'm ready to get through so I can get onto the lab.
Yeah.
You know, I just like let's just get through this and get to the lab. That's how I feel.
Yeah, for sure, and same. And the labs are always to me the most exciting part of RE games, right? It's that
Hmm.
time in the game in which you've put in all the hard work, the hard effort into getting to that point, and you're almost rewarded from a lore perspective too, right? You're finally like, okay, I've put all these pieces together and I kind of think that this is what's going on here. But then bang, you get to the labs and you're like, right, all of these documents become available. You find out what's actually happening behind the scenes, and it's just a
Hmm.
great, fulfilling feeling. And you definitely get that with Remake. When you see
Hmm.
Wesker in the lab coat, and Birkin's there as well, and you're like, oh yeah, cool. You get to see what goes on behind the scenes to a certain extent. As far as how the labs look graphically, I don't think there's much work needed there. Like there was a huge overhaul in. I know we keep going back to RE2 OG and RE2 remake, but
Hmm.
it's the best kind of gauge that we have. There was a huge overhaul on those labs.
Yeah.
And I think they look absolutely incredible in the remake. And I believe we spoke about it before, and you're of the opinion that they're inspired by the W.S.
The
Anderson
movies,
movies,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, because they call it the nest instead of the hive like it is in the movie. And
Yeah.
that's one thing. And the looks of it is very sleek and um like high tech. It's like higher tech than the 90s had.
Mm. And uh,
Than our 90s had anyway.
yeah, for yeah. And like I don't think the same level of overhaul needs to be put into the labs in an RE1 remake. I think the way in which they look matches the tone of the mansion
Mhm.
itself. And I think to overhaul it in a similar way to make it tie in with what we see in RE2 and RE3 remake. We won't talk about
Mhm.
RE3 remake because that's a whole conversation in of itself. But
Yeah.
I think giving it that kind of glossy look wouldn't fit in with the overall tone. So I think that's another
No.
area that can be left alone. So I think at this juncture, based on like discussion around graphics and stuff, I think it's fair to say that the majority of the game holds up, it stands up today, and it doesn't need
Mhm.
it. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of course I agree with most of the points. Well, almost all the points. It's the only thing that I would change, like if in the labs itself, and just going back to that, is In the original games and between the remake as well, the labs are very industrial, and that fits the aesthetic perfectly. But I would like them to maybe expand the labs just a little bit, and like maybe show a correlation to the remake. The remake's very sleek. Remake two, I mean, is very sleek and modern and all that, but it could do like the lab was built in the '60s, so they could do like a precursor to that, like a prototype of that in certain areas of the lab, like they've expanded it or whatever.
Ah,
Like if they added new rooms, and
ah.
it could be like '60s or '80s, just kind of like an old lab because it was the first lab that Umbrella used, and then they moved on to the Nest.
So what you're saying is they would your idea would be to take some of the concepts that have already been implemented for RE2 remake labs and RE3 remake labs and just kind of install like an older prototype version of that within the lab in
Yeah,
RE1
like
remake.
maybe like where the tyrants are, because it's quite different a little
Mm.
bit. It's not. It's very industrial, the rest of the lab, but then where the tyrants are and some of the other areas you can see where they're doing tests, maybe that could be more, like an older prototype version of the Nest, the way it looks
Yeah,
like
that.
our earlier tech, just to have kind of a correlation between if they remade one, that so it would connect with two remake
Mhm.
in the same way, like the very industrial as it is in the original. This would be just like the prototype of the RE2 version.
That's sick. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That'd be awesome. Yeah, like I think what we've kind of established is the lab in RE1 remake as it currently stands is more of an extension of the house,
Yeah.
whereas you'd prefer to see the lab be more of an entity in and of itself, um, with the motif being based off the labs that they've put into RE2 and RE3 remake, but like an older version. Yeah, that'd be really sick. And I think
Yeah.
they would need to be fleshed out a little bit more too. I think you'd mentioned that, um just make it a little bit more of an intricate adventure. I think the cave and
Hmm.
the labs within RE1 remake as it stands today are very, I don't want to use the word linear because there is a little bit of over and back, but they're definitely not as convoluted as the house in of itself. But yeah. So I guess moving on then,
Hmm.
so with regards to character models, so they're the character models that we're seeing in RE1 remake today, I personally think look great. They're fantastic.
Hmm.
Um but they're out of sync with regards to what's going on with the remakes. For example, we have Julia Voth Jill in RE1 remake.
Hmm.
And since then her character has been updated. I don't feel a disconnect though. Like when I think of the remakes and the characters within the game, I'm like, yeah, no, this is RE1 remake, RE2 remake, RE3 remake. Even though there
Hmm.
is that model difference, I just don't feel enough of a disconnect to warrant any changes.
I agree. I mean, of course, they'd probably use the remake 3 model for Jill, but um, it doesn't really. I don't really think of it. It doesn't affect me. I mean, it doesn't. It's not disconnected enough for me to think, oh, well, this is a completely different person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in 3 versus 1.
Yeah, yeah,
And as far as character models, I really wouldn't want them to update their like stars outfits. I kind of like how everybody's different a little bit.
yeah. It's that
Like,
unique flavor that
yeah.
we've come to love with all of the characters. Updating it to be in sync and quote unquote incorrect with how um a police department's uniform should be across the board. I just don't know. I don't want it changed. We're beginning to sound like boomers here, but I really don't want it changed. I think a lot of the people that want the character models updated and in the RE engine want it for maybe different reasons. If you want to,
Yeah,
if you,
possibly.
yeah, if you go on to some of those Twitter accounts of the people who are crying out for a remake with updated character models, I can guarantee you, you could probably go into some of their liked posts, and there's Jill wearing nothing but a
Yeah.
smile, nothing else but a smile. So, yeah, I think we're in the same boat with regards to how we feel graphically with
Mhm.
regards to the game standing the test of time. So we haven't started any arguments with each other yet, which is great and surprising. So yeah, moving on then. The gameplay. So, like I'd mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, when I was on Reddit looking at different people's perspectives and opinions on the matter, the big thing is the fixed camera angles and the tank controls
Mhm.
versus the over the shoulder gameplay. Now,
Mhm.
I it's not shocking for either of us to jump to the conclusion that neither of us mind the tank controls and the fixed camera angles
Mhm.
because of back in the day it was a requirement to really
Yeah.
feel that sense of dread, right? That we talked about that the mansion instills in us as we're playing. And it's one of those things that I know I personally love about the originals.
Mhm.
Um but there's a whole generation of people who absolutely detest the tank controls and the fixed camera angles, and they just want
Mhm.
the over the shoulder experience. If I'm just going to put a question out there, so if the game was remade again, do you think
Mhm.
they should go the route of over the shoulder or fixed? My personal idea is not my personal idea, but like what I think they should do is give the option, is give players the option. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it
Mhm.
though.
Yeah, given the option would be good. I think what they would most likely do is is the over the shoulder, because we already have one that's fixed camera, and this is just me personally, I would love another fixed camera Resident Evil,
Same.
but because it captures that mystery of the games, the mystery that's in it, most of the Resident Evils. It's what's going on here, blah blah blah, what's around this corner. And I was more wary of over the shoulder until RE2 remake, where they captured it well for me. They captured the horror and the terror and stuff even over the shoulder.
Oh, for sure.
So
Like walking
if
in
it was
those.
more in terms,
Sorry.
yeah.
No, go on. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, walking through the corridors of the RPD, especially that first scene with the police officer in the corner, and that entire
Mhm.
that's incredible. Like that is so good, and I don't fear that they will be able to capture the same level of horror and dread by doing over the shoulder as well. I agree. Sorry, I cut across you there.
No, no, it's fine. I was just it just as long as it has the mystery, and I was always wary of over the shoulder because of the what's around the corner thing and all that. But then they captured it in remake 2 for me. So I would be able to trust them, I think, to do over the shoulder again. And as long as they stick close to the atmosphere of the remake, it could be done, I think.
For sure.
They do need to. I would like if they included a fixed camera option, but they're not really catering to us anymore.
No, no, they're not. But interestingly enough, I think a couple of weeks ago, um, there was a mod released for RE2 Remake where somebody actually created a fixed camera angle mod for the game. I think not only is it just fixed camera angle, but it's got the moving camera like you have with Code Veronica. I think there's an
uh,
option to do that as well, and it looks great. To be honest, it looks fantastic. I think what gets lost though with fixed camera angles is the combat side of
mhm.
things, right? I'm going to use the word here, but you're fixed to what you can do shooting wise and how you approach bosses and things like that. You're literally just pointing up or down or in the center with regards to combat. Um, Whereas the over the shoulder lends itself to more of an immersive combat experience, which I do think
Mhm.
remake would benefit from, because any time I go back to Remake, it almost feels, especially in hindsight now when we have all of the other games, it feels like a very, I don't want to use the word easy experience, but it feels like
Hmm.
a very walk in the park experience when it comes to those boss fights. You just need to pump enough lead into them,
Hmm.
and they're done, right? Whereas with RE2 Remake, we can see that there's different ways of going about fights, there's different ways of tackling those bosses. So I do think from a gameplay perspective, over the shoulder would lend itself better to more modern day combat that people are used to now.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I think I know this is moving on a little bit, but I think the only thing that I would I think one big thing that could come from a remake that would really benefit is the story, because it's very separated, and it messes with the lore. I know a lot of people probably don't care about lore, but if anybody knows me, a lore whore. And there's no way to play the game that's canon. It's impossible. You cannot play Resident Evil 1 and it be a canon story, because either Chris has been locked up the whole time and did nothing, and Rebecca dies, or Jill was locked up the whole time and you never see Barry again, even though both survive. So one thing that could really benefit from a remake is like a cohesive story. Like, this is Jill's path, this is Chris' path. They both happened. Maybe one of them gets locked up at the end of each, just to keep it that part where you can choose who, um, what affects your ending. Like if you save Chris or Jill, maybe that can stay the same. Like maybe they get captured later in the story, but I think they both need to be there and present in the story
Yeah, and
in
that's,
either scenario you play. Yeah.
and that's totally fair. I'm not a huge lore person from the perspective of, like, I have a general idea of what's going on. Umbrella bad way, Jill great, yay. Um, but yeah, it's
Mhm.
interesting to get that perspective on the lore of Ori 1 Remake not actually align. Well, I wouldn't say not aligning, but like you said, there's no way to canon play the game. Just for people listening, and including myself, give us a reminder of what the actual canon is for RE1, the ending.
Hang on a second. Give me 1 second.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. These dogs barking. You might have to edit this part
yeah,
out.
no worries.
Sorry.
I can't hear
Can
anything.
you hear
Nope,
them, or
nope,
is it
nope.
okay? Well, then
No,
I'll
we're leaving
talk.
this
Good.
in.
Okay. Oh no,
Yeah. No,
please
you're
don't.
good. You're good.
uh, okay. The canon ending is um, Jill and Chris go against Wesker. Barry and Rebecca survive, and the mansion explodes, and they think Wesker's dead. That's basically it. But even in the best ending of either scenario, you can't that can't happen, because one of them's missing. Either Barry or Rebecca's missing, and I think it's more likely that Chris confronted Wesker in the lab, like right there at the end. I think that's the more likely, because there's more of that rivalry with them in the rest of the story and the rest of the plot. But yeah, that's the only thing that I would really want from a remake, is just a little more canon story, a little more cohesive.
Which totally makes sense. So it's not a complete overhaul as such, you're saying, because it's literally the foundation upon which the entire franchise is built around. You just want a little bit more of a solid in the
Hmm.
ending that makes sense with regards what's happened with the rest of the timeline, which is totally acceptable. Um, I was going to mention something with regards additions to the story. So we had the addition with the original I keep saying original. I don't keep saying. I keep saying it in my brain. Original remake, but with regards remaking the original and this iteration that we're talking about today, the addition of Lisa was huge, and I think universally loved and accepted. Would you want more storytelling around Lisa, or do you think the extent at which it's told in remake is good enough as it is.
Um, I think the Lisa Trevor stuff is pretty spot on. Like it's, I can't think of anything I'd add because it adds a level of mystery even more to than what the original story was. And you don't need everything explained to you because even though I just said I wanted a more cohesive story, still in horror you don't need every little thing explained to you or it ruins it. And you know, even though they do kind of do a good enough job of explaining what's going on with Lisa, it's still mysterious for most of the game. Like, what is this strange monster that's here? It wasn't here in the original. Maybe they could, they could add her a little earlier in the game, but I think it's kind of perfect where she's at. You
Yeah,
know,
and
where you it's like right after the mansion, and you it's just this new thing all of a sudden, this whole new area that was never in the original.
yeah, for sure. With regards how the story proceeds in remake, it comes in at the perfect time. It comes in at that time when you're beginning to feel more comfortable. You're beginning to feel a little bit more settled. It's that expression, you're comfortable with being uncomfortable, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? Here's Lisa. Here's Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Have her. Let's see how you do with her. And yeah, I had forgotten that you said something there that tickled something in my brain from well over, it was 13 years ago at this point. When I was in university, I actually did a module on literature, horror, gothic literature, and I'd
Mm-hmm.
forgotten about the whole concept of you can't have everything explained to you, because if you have everything explained to you, if there's a logical reason behind everything that's going on and it's presented to you on a plate, it not only ruins the immersion, but it ruins the story as a whole. So yeah, like initially when I came into this conversation first, that's why I wanted to pose the question your way. And not only are you the Ori god in my mind, but I wanted to see what your take was. I personally came into this conversation thinking, yeah, you know what, maybe they could dive a little bit deeper with regards to Lisa and her family's story. But now that you mention it, having all of those little aspects explained to you would take away from that mystery factor. So I'm not even going to dive into my thoughts on what I initially thought, but yeah, I guess the overall objective with Lisa, like you had mentioned, is bringing her in at that time at which you begin to feel comfortable with your more comfortable with your surroundings. But it's also just to
Mm-hmm.
illustrate like that there was absolutely no compassion really as such for the human race with regards all of the work that was being done within
Mm-hmm.
the Spencer Mansion and the labs. And they did that through the example of Lisa. And the especially that part that hits me really really hard is when you have those four stones, you push them off over the
Mm-hmm.
edge, and she picks up her mother's, I believe it's her mother's skull, right? Correct me if I'm wrong here, by the way. And
That's
it's,
correct.
and then she jumps
That's
on,
right.
like it's kind of like, oh man. And for me, I'm kind of like, oh, this crazy bitch that's been chasing me around for a while. It's like it makes you stop and consider. You're like, hang on, this was done to her. She's a victim,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you kind of put those pieces together. Whereas if it was just kind of like presented to you, you're kind of like, all right, cool story, bro, or whatever. So no, that's a
Mm-hmm.
really really good point, like that you mentioned. um yeah. And then I guess the other addition that I wanted to bring up would be, would you like to see any additional changes in the same fashion that we saw with the Crimson Heads? Would you like to see like an additional type of enemy brought in, or what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I was thinking, I was thinking, it kind of messes with the lore a little bit, but that's, gameplay's first, of course. And like maybe if like you're on a hard mode or something, the Crimson Heads could even further evolve into lickers, because that's really what in the original plotline. It's like they're two different strains of the T virus, so they turn into Crimson Heads instead of lickers. But that's kind of where the lickers come from in two. It's a new strain, and they make lickers instead of Crimson Heads zombies the longer they're infected. and that's why there's so many in Raccoon City as opposed to RE1 where there's none. Is Crimson Heads. That was
So
kind of like a retcon where they added that in where it was a different strain in the remake of one to make it, to kind of go with the liquor from two.
gotcha, gotcha. So yeah, so so you're saying right now you wouldn't make any adjustments.
Not real, not really, but that would be kind of a kind of a shake up in the same way
Mm,
that the Crimson Head was. Is that,
mm.
oh, you've killed the Crimson Head, and now a little later, now you got something else to deal with. It's even worse, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. How do you feel about? I guess moving on then. How do you feel about the designs for um Yawn, the designs for Plant 42? Plant 42? Am I right? Is that the
Hmm.
right number? I'm
Yeah,
not a
that's
numbers
correct.
guy. Says a guy who works in finance. But uh yeah, those designs to me are pretty basic with regards
Hmm.
how the models appear. And I coming from a lore, I know you're like heavily like lore orientated and stuff like that. Is there room to update those models in a way that makes them a little bit more sinister? Like they're already sinister enough. Don't get me wrong. When you go into that attic, I want to call it an attic room, and Yawn is in there, and you're like, oh my god,
Hmm.
oh my god, it's actually like it is a little bit overwhelming. But at the end of the day, it's like it's just a big snake, you know. And then with same with Plant 42, it's like it's just a big
Yeah.
plant. It's just a big plant.
Yeah.
Do you think there's room? And once again, I could get slated in the comments for this for not being in touch with the lower side of things. Do you think there's room to make them a bit more? I don't want to use the word gory, but a bit more rough around the edges, a bit more.
Hmm.
How do I explain it? I don't want to say the word zombified, but you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, this like make them more,
Yeah,
more in general.
yeah,
Yeah, they're
it's just kind of like somebody took a picture of a snake and said, "All right, just make that 20 times bigger and put it in the attic." You know, you know, like it's just
hmm
one of those kind of things. Sorry, I cut across you there.
no, it's there's plenty. I think there's a lot of room for that. They could do it in the same way, like from the in the original game, the sharks were like, oh, little bitty shark things, and then you're just running. It's not a big deal in the original game, the sharks. But I'm terrified of the shark room. Before I go in, I'm like, okay, let me save because I'm gonna get ate.
Yeah, yeah.
They completely
I'm always running through that.
expanded that.
I'm always running through that room. Leave my heels alone. Leave my heels alone. Leave my heels alone. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. It's always like I can feel. Even as I'm sitting here right now, my shoulders are getting closer to my head, and I'm like, oh yeah. But like, yeah, it's just big. They're just big versions of what we're used to. So yeah, no, for sure.
Mhm.
I definitely am of the opinion that they could be rougher around the edges. There could be a little bit more of a fear factor to them.
Mhm.
And then alongside that, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier with regards to gameplay, they can certainly, if they were to remake the game, once again, this is all hypothetical, um,
Mhm.
not nonsense discussion that we're having here, but you know, there could be more done to make those encounters an immersive experience from a gameplay perspective, in my opinion. Now once again, how you would go about that, just do a very similar thing to what you do with the remakes already. But I definitely think that the remake would benefit from that perspective as well.
Yeah, they could for like Plant 42, um they could make the whole residence like they could maybe expand it a little bit so that the further you get into it, it's getting more overgrown with the plant, and maybe it's whipping you more because you got that one part where it grabs your neck in the remake.
Mm,
If you don't push the box over the hole, it'll
yep.
grab your neck when you go through. They can kind of expand on that, and the closer you get, it gets a little worse, and maybe you got more places to avoid. Or I don't know if they should if they should include the ivies because I think that's more of a like a Resident Evil 2
Mm-hmm.
progression because that's a different plant. It's like the evolution of Plant 42. or
Hmm.
maybe they could have a prototype of that. Maybe they're like part of the plant on the walls or something,
Yeah, yeah, and
and
that's
just like
sorry.
make it more grow overgrown as it goes. I'm sorry.
No,
That's
no, don't be
yeah.
sorry. I'm the one that keeps keeps cutting across. Once again, episode one, we're trying, we're trying the thing here. So no, no, that's like really really cool. I think the same people who I mentioned on Twitter a while ago with those suspicious likes would definitely want to keep that choking part in the game too. Like we saw with RE3 remake, the drain, it was a drain demos. Is that what you call them? That part in RE3 remake,
Yeah.
which that's shameful. Once again, we could talk about we could talk about that for a very long time. But yeah, no, I definitely yeah, I like that idea of creating a more extended version of the residence. And I think with that too, what I would do is I would make G Volt an absolute requirement. Then I would establish the whole experience in the residence around creating the it's called G Volt, right?
um, V-Jolt, yeah.
Vigil. Oh, fuck. Vigil. Sorry.
It doesn't
Once again, this is why
matter.
you're here for the lore side of things, and I'm just here to just talk absolute shit. Yeah, I would make that an absolute requirement, and that way then the whole experience of getting that together lends itself to expanding the residents. But I would also include with that, I would include like the combat section, right? Because if you use that in remake, and I never do, you lose
Mhm,
the entire combat aspect of it, right? You don't have to do anything. It just kills the plant,
mhm,
right? So what I would do is,
mhm.
and once again, I don't know if I'm stepping on lower toes here, and you can be the one to
No, it's
say,
alright if it is.
"Hey, stop that! I'm gonna stop you right there, pal." But I do think having that alongside the combat would allow for a more extended version of the resonance if they were going to push it that direction.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree, and, gameplay is first over lore, even though I love lore and stuff in games, just as long as the game's fun, and Resident Evil is fun, so I know. Um, but the V-Jolt parts, it could be like, maybe to get into the room period is you gotta use the V-Jolt and weaken it so, like, you can get in there
Oh,
for some reason.
yes, hell yeah, yeah, yeah. Keep going. Sorry.
And, I don't that
Oh,
was the
that was
only
it.
point.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe that's how you can the only way you can get in the room, you gotta weaken it enough to get in there, but it's still, like, still a presence, and because if you just poison it in the original, I think it just dies, it's been a minute. I think maybe with Jill, you just kill it automatic. I think you have to do it with Chris, maybe. I think you have to do it with Chris anyway, with Rebecca. It's
Yeah.
been a minute. It's been a
Yeah,
minute since
I
I
don't
played
know.
it.
You're asking the wrong. Well, you're not. I know you're not asking me, but you're not. You're not going to get any confirmation from me with regards to yes or no on that one. But no, that'd be sweet. Yeah, I mean, we started off this podcast being like, I'm gonna just put my hand up and say, I was like, nah, you know what? It doesn't need to be touched. It doesn't need to be touched. It's totally fine. It's fine the way it is. It's great. But the more we're talking here, there's such room for Capcom to spread their wings here and just enhance them on what they've done already with remake. But they need to be very if they are going to do it, they need to be very very careful, in my opinion, because as
Hmm.
I mentioned already, this is the foundation on which the entire franchise is built around. Now I know it's become much different. Like when you look at Resident Evil Village, you're looking
Hmm.
at you're looking at that fight scene with Heisenberg, for example. You're up in the air and you're like in a Gears of War game all of a sudden, versus Jill wandering around corridors. It's in a completely different place. But this is the game that
Hmm.
people know and love, and the Spencer Mansion in particular is something that a lot of people hold near and dear to their hearts. So
Mhm.
the kind of like I would say leaning towards kind of like the last area of discussion. Do you think it's worth the risk to remake this game?
Um,
Do you think there's anything
well,
to be gained or lost really by doing this?
I mean, you can always do the original is always or the remake of the original is always there, but um I mean, when they made the first remake, it was only 5 years after the first one. They made it 5 years later,
Hmm.
remade the whole thing, and it's because there's such an incredible leap in technology in those 5 years. There has been a leap in 22 years, of course,
Yeah, but
and
that leap that you're referring to, going from PS1 to like GameCube, like that is, and I know we've talked about this privately before, but that's insane. That leap is
yeah,
crazy. It's
just
crazy.
look at
Yeah,
it's been 5 years since RE2 remake now, and the games are barely any different. There's not it's not leaped the, barely at all, if any, in 5 years. But that 5 years was astronomical, and they made the game they wanted to make in the first place because the original was in 1996. It was the first. It wasn't the first of its kind, but it was it was doing a lot of new stuff. It was with the pre-rendered backgrounds, and people they'd never played with 3D environments quite like that before, and it was all new, new frontier. And they made what they could make with the the limitations they had at the time, and it's a huge jump in 5 years. And then they made the game they had envisioned from the beginning. As they said, they made the game they wanted to make when they remade it, and it's perfect in ways. Remake is perfect. I think it's the peak of survival, of that era of survival horror, of fixed camera, limited resource survival horror. It's the peak. It's I don't think there's anything that's as perfect as it is, but they could try and do it again with, like, make the peak of this new era, this new golden era of survival horror that was started with RE2 remake. And now we got all kinds of remakes coming out now, and new games that are in the same vein, and they could try to make the peak of it. That's one thing they could gain. And there's a lot of new fans of Resident Evil that don't want to play a fixed camera game, and they could gain a lot from it. I personally love the original, and if they never remake it, I'm fine. But they could gain something from it.
yeah. This isn't where I thought we were gonna land. To be honest, like, yeah, I definitely share the same sentiment with regards to if they never touch this ever again. I'm fine. I'm cool. If they did,
Hmm.
they're gonna hit a whole generation of people that wouldn't have played the game or experienced it otherwise.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, my take on it is a remake of the remake would be a nice to have, but it's not an absolute
Hmm.
need to have. There's
Yeah.
no need, like real need to do it. If someone turned around to me and said from Capcom, or an authority such as yourself, Nukes, was to turn around to me and say,
Already.
was to say that it's RE1 remake from 2002, it's RE2 remake from 2019, RE3 in 2020, and that's the linear progression of the remake games. I would be very happy to accept that as it is. But based on everything that we talked about today, be it like the move over to the over the shoulder, the updated graphics, which aren't totally required, but just some of those gameplay updates, making the combat more immersive. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, that would be awesome. But I personally speaking, would like them to pump more time into maybe different remakes. And I know which one is on the top of
Hmm.
your mind for sure. Um,
Yeah.
in Code
Code
Veronica.
Veronica.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And not only that, but RE9 as well. Like, and
Hmm.
keep going with the story. Keep it kind of fresh and alive, and keep giving us the original content. Yeah, it's sure the remakes are great. Like, look at RE4. Like, oh my god, like incredible experience. But you know,
Hmm.
have your teams that work on the remakes, and keep doing a great job on those, with the exception of RE3, of course. But I'd still like for them to work on those original experiences. Like, I thought Village was fantastic, for example, as well, and I thought RE7 was fantastic as well, and just make sure that their focuses are in the right area. I think that's the number one thing
Hmm.
that Capcom would need to do now.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any other horror games that you would want to see remade?
Hmm. Let me ponder on it. Is there anything that you want to see remade? Let me ponder on that while you answer.
The two I can think of is I'd like to see a remake of Parasite Eve. It was kind of like I don't know if you ever played Parasite Eve, but it was kind of like Final Fantasy and Resident Evil had a baby, and it come out a little. It came out in that RE2 era, where everyone was trying to jump on the survival horror bandwagon, and it's a great game.
Mm.
But I would like to see a modern remake of that or Dino Crisis.
I was just
I
going to say
never I never
the other
really even
popular one
played
is,
Dino Crisis.
yeah,
Yeah.
is Dino Crisis. I was going to give the smart ass answer and say I'd like to see RE3 remade. uh, but no, Dino Crisis was going to be my other answer there. There's people screaming out for that, and they're like, huh, they're not giving anything away.
Yeah, that's the two I can think of like right off the top of my head. And I don't really hear Parasite Eve enough, but that would be pretty good. But that's Square. I mean, or it was Final Fantasy. The people who made Final
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy, they that was their dip into horror. I never played the second one, but I like the first Parasite Eve a lot.
Mm. I think where I currently stand with gaming experiences right now is that it's not that I'm sick. It's like sick of the remakes or anything like that. But I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see a completely new franchise
Mm-hmm.
that it enamored, like, people are enamored by. Like, in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
like, I know it's going to be so hard for any type of company to ever get the following that the likes of Resident Evil or Silent Hill have, but I would love for a company to come out. I don't care if it's an indie company or a huge company that puts out AAA titles all the time, but I would absolutely love for a new franchise to
Mm-hmm.
be unanimously loved by people. Now, I know you're not going to please everybody. You're not going
No.
to get 100% across the board from people, but I definitely would love to have that type of horror franchise that releases a game, is universally loved, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh man, I can't wait for like part 2 or the second iteration of this game to come out. That's where
Mm-hmm.
I'm personally at with regards to my horror games
Yeah,
at the moment.
that would be good. There's not enough new series, and I know this has been episode about remakes, but there are a lot of them, and it's kind of been like it's kind of they're doing like Hollywood's doing, and they're just remaking and remaking and remaking. And I would really like to see something new as well. They're not enough risks taken.
For sure, and I think that's a big part of it too, right? We're at a point in time, and this could be getting a little bit deep or a little bit in the weeds, but everything is historically recorded now, right? We've got like
Hmm.
reference material, and it's, I'm not gonna lie, it's probably very hard for people who are creative and want to tell stories to write something that, like, to just go into a room, write something down on paper, and get their ideas down there, and like write something that's really good, hand it to somebody who knows what they're talking about, not someone like me, but like, somebody who's well clued into media and storytelling and movies and video games and has like a very good comprehensive knowledge of lore and stories. And it's probably very hard for someone to hand that material that they've just written without somebody going, you know what, this is very like X, Y, and Z, or this is very like, the one thing that comes to my mind, and it's not related to anything that we're talking about right now, is Avatar and Pocahontas. Like that Avatar is, I personally like those movies. I think
Uh-huh.
they're great, but it's a complete lift of Pocahontas, right? So
Hmm.
be it an intentional move or not, which I don't know, but I would imagine for anyone that's living in this era right now to try and create something that's new and fresh is very very difficult, and I do sympathize with that. But I do think there is that gap in video games where there's still room to bring new, fresh, and exciting
Hmm.
gaming experiences. Maybe the story side of it is gonna be inspired by something else, but I still feel as if there's enough working parts within a video game for us to still have that room there for fresh and new experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like you said, there's space in horror games, and it would be good to have something new on the horizon.
Yeah, and fair play to like all of those indie companies or smaller companies that have tried to like fill the void, or like single dev people, or whoever it may be. There's some fantastic stuff out there. There's some like incredible stuff out there. I don't know how to pronounce this, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Signalis or Signalis, I think it's Signalis.
Signalis is what I
Signalis.
always said. I don't.
Yeah, I think it's Signalis. Yeah. Like that is
Yeah, that was phenomenal.
an underrated gem. It's incredible. So like there are experiences out there from smaller companies that can scratch the itch, but I'd like to see it,
Mm.
like see these types of games pushed a bit more by the bigger boys, if you will, um or something that is made by a smaller company that just becomes absolutely like, just gets sent, goes to the moon, like it goes beyond the stratosphere, like that becomes so popular, and it essentially becomes not the rebirth of like survival horror, what have you, but just gives us another series of games to be excited about. Because I do feel like it's like, okay, we have our Resident Evil, we have our Silent Hill, but we there is room for something else for sure, and whatever that is, I'm not creative enough to come up with it, but I do feel like there is the room and there is the opportunity there to do it.
Absolutely.
Sweet. Well, I think we'll end it there. I know we started off talking about Ori remake, and that was going to be the that was going to be the meat of the discussion. But I do like where that went towards the end there. But yeah.
We got us some potatoes on. Sorry,
All right.
sorry to bring that. I didn't. That
Yeah,
wasn't in, that wasn't intentional.
yeah, it's definitely, I think it's definitely time we wrap it up. But yeah, this has been the Rack and the Rap podcast, and yeah, we'll catch you guys in episode 2. See ya.
We'll see you.